Hey, do you want to live under the watchful eyes of corporations for your entire life? No? Well, unfortunately we do, but you know that. In Quasimorph, however, it's much, much worse, with the Hexarchy, an informal alliance or oligopoly of 6 corporations. First, the Andreev Company, or ANCOM. In the previous video, I gave a bit of background on ANCOM. However, the Quasimorph wiki at the time stated that they spread anarcho-communist propaganda. They fixed it. It now states that they propagate anarcho-capitalist values. But now that that's cleared up, SBN and Realware. Another corporation not yet added, though its name was given in the devlog, the 𝐓𝐇𝐄 Corporation is coming with the next update. As for the other 2 corporations, we don't know anything about them yet. Other corporations exist, such as Daydream Chems or French Compt, but they're much less influential over the solar system and tend to stay around the bottom of the stock without some help. There are 2 other factions that aren't a corporation nor demonic entities from an alternate dimension. The Unchained Belt, a conglomerate of traitors, terrorists, and space pirates, revealed in the devlog and coming in the next update, and the Civil Resistance, which traces its history back to state armies that opposed the corporations in the Great Anarchist Revolution, referring to themselves as coal nodes. The corporations think that the Civil Resistance uses some kind of CBT,
cock and ball torture, CBT,
cognitive behavioral therapy, or maybe drug or genetically or cybernetically enhance their freedom fighters because coal nodes appear to feel no pain and have no emotions, just fighting with a mixture of passion and fanatical ferocity, which makes sense to me because
democracy is non-negotiable.
As Prime said, democracy is non-negotiable, so we'll be helping the Civil Resistance start another revolution, bringing the corporations under control so we can unite them against the Quasimorphs for the good of all mankind. But not everyone likes democracy. The corporations running the show certainly don't. So the Civil Resistance starts all the way at the bottom of the stock exchange. We'll have our work cut out for us. Starting on Phobos, we'll have no missions that benefit the Resistance, so we travel to Havoc, where the Resistance needs us to requisition an experimental electronic device that SBN was working on. Selecting Francis Reed Daly, the Shrike, and if you're wondering what a shrike is, or what it means, not only does it mean butcher in Latin, but it's also a little bird that will pick up small rodents and animals and drop them on pointy sticks so that it can pluck out their innards and eat them. So we fit him out with some of our best armor and give him a Hydra 12 with about 30 rounds. After landing, Francis enters the facility, finding a worker in a position. A short fight ensues after he tears the physician's clothes into rags, stopping his bleeding. He loots the worker, and taking his clothes and his builder nail gun, Francis moves on to looking for the elevator to the 2nd floor, finding it quite quickly. After exiting the elevator, Francis heads down the hall, finding another worker in a position. After killing and looting them, he goes back the way he came and clears a med bay of 2 enemies that were there. Checking the last room, he finds the electronic device, calls for evac, and exits the facility. Now we'll be skipping a few contracts to our 5th contract, to a space station orbiting the moon, Fuller. Named after Richard Buckminster Fuller, a genius engineer from before the Great Anarchist Revolution, we'll be assaulting at Fuller's core, looking to requisition, another experimental device from French Compt. As you can see, our man Francis has done well for himself in the last few contracts, getting himself some considerable upgrades, but still has a long way to go to get the best gear. Landing on the 1st floor, we'll have to fight our way to the core, and because French Compt is a prison corps, they'll have tons of prisoners keeping watch, with a few heavily armed guards to keep the peace. Through the landing pad door, we spot our first prisoners, absolutely mowing them down with our SMG. Taking an AZ-94 off of one of the prisoners, we continue on. Finding a jammer and a handful of prisoners, Francis sets to work eliminating the threats, and after looting the buckshot and 7.97 ammo, he destroys the jammer, allowing him to use his map. After destroying the jammer, Francis loots a container and continues on finding the elevator room. Francis decides to explore the first floor a little, hoping to find an auto dock for future use. A prisoner down the hall then erupts into a shower of blood as a Quasimorph tears its way into our reality, making Francis feel like that little kid from the third Conjuring movie. Taking care of the Quasi, another prisoner rounds the corner as Francis shoots him with his shotgun. Another Quasi rips his way through the holes the shotgun made, and after putting some through it, Francis drops his SMG in favor for the AZ-96 he picked up earlier. Not finding an auto dock, Francis moves to the elevator and descends to the second floor. On the second floor, Francis has peeked through some of the rooms, finding little resistance, until he comes to a library, finding 4 prisoners, and killing them spawns 2 Quasimorphs from their bodies. With the Quasimorph shambling toward him and more prisoners around the corners, Francis elects to back out of the room and wait for some of the fighting to blow over, but not before killing one of the Quasis. After drinking a few of his alcoholic beverages, Francis enters once more, finishing off a few of the Quasis and killing another prisoner. More and more of the prisoners start filing in, looking for a fight from all the commotion going on, and if they keep coming, Francis will keep shooting. Once everything's dead, he loots up to replenish his expended ammunition and heads for the elevator to the final floor of the facility. Exiting the elevator and opening the door to the hallway, Francis sees a lone guard. Spraying him with the AZ, he falls back and waits for him to bleed out. With the Quasimorphosis meter at 311, Quasis start spawning and killing some of the prisoners and guards, making finding the electronic device much easier with less resistance. Finding the electronic device next to a jammer, Francis fights his way through the prisoners and Quasis along with the occasional guard. Picking up the device, however, he realizes he's surrounded by Quasis. Atarius, an Iron Maiden-looking thing, and after killing a prisoner, he spawns an Equus, Hecarim if he was actually fast and had wheels instead of hooves. Calling in for evacuation and running to the elevator, finishing our 5th contract. We'll take a look at the stock exchange. In 5 contracts, we've managed to take the Silver Resistance from the bottom of the barrel to a prime contender, with its power having grown from 550 to 2,286, putting the Resistance in a solid 3rd place in the solar system. But 3rd place isn't good enough, and as Ricky Bobby's dad said,
"If you ain't first, you're last."
We've got more work to do, and too little time to cover it all, so we're skipping yet again to our 8th contract on Citadel 1 in Energy 1, a power station, to again steal an electronic device, this time from the Church of Revelations. Starting on the 3rd floor of 4, we pick up with Francis not doing too well, starving, and with a fairly high Q-morphosis meter, he's struggling through this one. Exiting the elevator room and walking into the hall, he spots 3 acolytes down the hall, shooting one of them as the door next to him opens, revealing more of them, so he backs up and readies his shotgun for a fight. Realizing with his starvation and high Q meter, he can't finish the floor in these conditions, so he grabs a piece of meat off of an acolyte, but before running back to the elevator, he uses his Eye of 𝐓𝐇𝐄, revealing the map completely as well as Quasimorphs for a short time. Back on the 2nd floor, he eats the meat, raising his Q meter even more to 901. Thinking the floor is clear, he goes back to a pile of bodies, hoping to find some more meat to spawn the Baron, accidentally running into a Ferris. Finding a piece of meat, Francis takes a bite, spawning the Sultan, Baron of the Brahmfratura Mercury. Running back down the hall of the 2nd elevator for a more defensible position, Francis loads Dragon Volley shells into his shotgun, hoping to set the Sultan ablaze. Starting one early with the Ferris so that the fire has time to spread a bit, it unfortunately all but goes out by the time the Sultan appears. After setting him alight, he reloads back to Buckshot and lets him have it for free. Attempting to back up, the Sultan is just too fast, so after a lucky knockback, Francis commits to the fight. And Sultan dead, we take his pact as a trophy, and the Q meter reset. We find some 𝐓𝐇𝐄 that I missed beforehand, and return to the 3rd floor, ready to find the elevator. But because of the Q meter having gotten so high, most everyone is already dead, so we make our way to the elevator quite easily. On the 4th floor, Francis puts the rest of the Dragon Volley shells to work, burning a considerable amount of acolytes and killing a few more with the buckshot, before moving back to the first room he lit on fire to grab the electronic device, calling for extraction, and exiting the premises. Here's a look at the stock exchange. After 10 missions, we're on top with a considerable jump after 5 more contracts, going from 2,286 to 3,586. But with RealWare close behind, we'll have to extend the lead. So jumping to our 12th contract, finally doing something other than getting an electronic device, we'll be sabotaging French Comp's radar dishes on 𝐓𝐇𝐄 in one of their prisons, February. Starting on the 3rd floor again, although a little better off this time with half of Francis's hunger bar and a much lower Q meter, Francis exits the elevator and starts blasting, spawning a Quasimorph. Finding the first 2 radar dishes pretty easily, Francis loots the containers and sends a hail of buckshot through the radar dishes. Walking in on some Quasimorphs absolutely tearing apart some prisoners, Francis decides with his Q meter at 670, he'll have to backtrack to the elevator, hoping to reach it before the Q meter gets too high, spawning the Venusian Baron. But before getting onto the elevator, he tries to kill a Quasimorph, hoping for an idol, but you can't get lucky every time, and with more Quasis running for him, he ascends to the 2nd floor. Reaching the 2nd floor with his Q meter at 974, Francis has no time to do much but kill a prisoner and try to get to a defensible position. As Quasis run through the door, he hits a barrel with a pellet, igniting a fire. More Quasis run through the fire, spreading it closer and closer to Francis as he dumps shell after shell into a seemingly never-ending horde of Quasis, blasting one out of the station until 𝐓𝐇𝐄 rounds the corner and stalks through the fire, following his minions to their mark. Francis unloads everything he can at the Baron, having to back up after taking a volley. Luckily, the Quasi in front of the Baron continues its lumbering toward Francis, blocking a few of the shots from the Baron. Francis continues to back up, reloading his punishment, unloading the gun, until the Baron is no more. Now that 𝐓𝐇𝐄 is dead, Francis takes his pact. They shall be filled. Which is not what you want to hear walking to the men's restroom at a park in downtown Albuquerque at 3 a.m. Anyway, Francis uses some 𝐓𝐇𝐄 to heal as he jumps onto the elevator because, unfortunately, he still has a job to do. But as he's returning to the room that was filled to the brim with Quasis, he realizes that he's addicted to 𝐓𝐶, which will spawn Quasimorphs and force the Q meter up faster and faster, both of these symptoms getting worse the worse the addiction gets. So Francis must move fast. but with only one more radar dish to destroy, he's also not that worried. Picking up a rookie combat vest for an extra inventory slot, and continuing, finding the escape pod he called in as he'd returned to the 3rd floor, he deposits some of his bigger items into it. These items will return to the ship whether or not he finishes the raid. Putting 4 shells into the dish and calling for evac, Francis runs back to the elevator, finishing our 12th contract. The Resistance is still on top after 5 more contracts, and the lead is expanding with RealWare 282 points behind us. We'll move on to our final contract. For our last contract of the video, Francis must go to Mercury on Boethius and Network Center to sabotage one of SBN's data servers. It's actually a radar dish, but it's SBN, and it's always a radar dish if you're sabotaging, and until the devs add some variants, we've got to make them ourselves. So, on the 3rd floor, Francis exits the elevator room, using an eye and revealing the floor. Down the hall, a few info cops run out of a laboratory. After putting them down, Francis moves up, looking through the door and spotting an officer, killing him, spawning a Malik, and spreading acid all around the room. A brief fight from a Malik and an info cop ends with a Forest spawning from the cop. Moving into the room, he dumps 12 shells into the Quasis, reloading once they're eliminated. And while waiting for the acid to dissolve, he heads down the hall, killing a physician, but being met with a barrage of energy beams meant for an e-collapsing Malik. Running back for an autodoc after bandaging his wounds. Before he can use it, however, a Malik spawned from the physician has followed him and is aggressively headbutting him. Francis heals his wounds from the autodoc before shooting 4 shells at the skull, and using the autodoc to get some health back. Before the Malik does some real damage to him, knocking him back, he's able to kill it. Now that it's dead, and with Francis on low health and no autodoc, Francis moves to the elevator, returning to the 2nd floor, running through it to the 1st elevator, preferring to fight the Baron on ground level. Loading Dragon Volley shells into his shotgun, Francis takes up a position where he can watch both potential entrances. As he waits for the Baron, a Malik enters down the hall, firing a few shots from his punishment as the Malik rushes him. He falls back down the hall, turning around and spotting the Sultan. Falling back a bit more and setting the Quasis alight with 4 shells. Running back to the door with barrels exploding, he manages to get it open without being lit on fire. Setting alight the Sultan again, he switches to the punishment, hitting the Sultan with 3 5-shot bursts, backing up in between each one. With the last burst of the punishment, Francis is forced to switch back to a shotgun. After 2 bursts, however, the Sultan falls, and Francis is able to take his pact as a trophy. After waiting for the fire to go out, Francis returns to the 3rd floor to continue his contract. Back on the 3rd floor, there's another one of my favorite moments of walking through a facility, just looting and looking at all the destruction the Quasimorphs have wrought. But back to the reason we're here, Francis descends to the last elevator to the 4th floor, ready to get this contract over with so he can go home and crack open a corky juice with the boys. On the 4th floor, Francis sends a dragon shell down the elevator hall, sparking a fire that burns most of the enemies, leaving only an AR alive, which gets put down with ease from Francis's punishment. After searching a few rooms and continuing down the hall, Francis opens a door, finding 2 ARs and a physician. Lighting them on fire and backing out of the room, he can't get the door shut before an AR with a razor catches up to him and starts hacking. Francis attempts to run away from the flaming robot with a sword, but it's just too fast and keeps stabbing him as he runs away, throwing fire throughout the hall, eventually lighting Francis on fire too, before he unloads the punishment into the AR. As a Ferris ambushes him from behind, it's not looking good, but Francis is able to duck into a security room and begin healing. Behind the desk, for some reason, the forest just walks into the fire and burns itself to death for fun. After the fire goes out, Francis continues, finding a medroom with an autodoc, and 3 SBN officers. Unfortunately, the doc takes a bullet in the exchange. Going to the door on the opposite side of the room, Francis throws a thermal grenade through the door and blocks it so that none of the enemies can follow through after him. He goes back to the medroom to get a first aid kit, and after the fire's out, Francis shoots down the door and moves to the room with the SBN server. The server explodes as Francis puts one last shell into it now that there's not a forest tanking all the pellets, and calls for evac as he runs to the elevator to finish out our last contract. The civil resistance is at the top of the food chain, at 10,894. After starting at 550 at the very bottom of the barrel, but with Techland close behind and ANCOM and RealWare still very real threats, can the resistance win out against these threats and unite humanity with the power of democracy? Perhaps with the help of the MAGNUM PMCs, they'll win their revolution.
Democracy is truth. Communism is death.
Thanks for watching my second video, guys. Unfortunately, I wanted to get it out before the 0.8 update went live, and technically I did because it's on the beta server. I missed the deadline, if you ask me, because that wench Haylene made me go to work instead of editing on my days off. But again, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you really feel like it, and have a wonderful rest of your days.